Hey, welcome back guys to Intermediate JavaScript, jQuery programming with JSON and Ajax. My name is Kaustubh Garge, but you can call me KG. I'll be covering session 3 of this Intermediate JavaScript course today. Before we begin, let's look at the session outline. So in this session, we'll be discussing what JavaScript libraries are and how you can use them, understand what jQuery is, how do we add jQuery to our HTML page, how do we modify our existing HTML page. But before we do that, we'll also get a quick refresher about DOM, that is the document object model. We already covered this in the Introduction to JavaScript course, but a quick refresher will definitely be helpful, after which we'll cover on how we can manipulate the DOM using jQuery. If you do not have fundamentals of JavaScript programming clear, then you must take the Introduction to JavaScript course as well as HTML to understand the document object model. So let's understand what JavaScript libraries are. JavaScript libraries are a collection of functions which have been written by other people that we can use in our code. These functions provide us with certain functionalities, which can save our time, as we don't have to rewrite the code from scratch to implement certain functionalities. Consider a slideshow, for example. You want to show the user a slideshow of photographs. Now, this functionality has been used for many years on the web. Few smart developers have already written functions to showcase this functionality. What if they provided us with this code? They do, in fact. This is provided to us by a library which has all of these pre-written functions. And jQuery is one of such libraries, which makes our lives easier by providing us predefined functions which handle certain functionalities. So before we dive into getting jQuery, let's understand what jQuery is. jQuery is a JavaScript library designed to simplify HTML DOM manipulation, event handling, CSS animation, and Ajax. It is free and open source under MIT license. So now how do we get jQuery? We get it from jQuery.com. We can either download the file or get it through CDN, which stands for Content Delivery Network. So let's quickly go to jQuery.com to review our options. So as you can see, there's a big button here that says download jQuery. If you select it, you get all of the options to get the jQuery. So one of the options is to download the files and save it with HTML. We also have options to use tools such as npm and yarn, which we won't be using for this session. And we have something called CDN, which I personally like to use. CDN is called Content Delivery Network, so we get the jQuery from one of these CDNs. So let me look at Google CDN real quick. So as you can see, you get a script tag with a source for Google servers where the jQuery file is located. All we have to do is include the script tag in our header or the head tag in the HTML. That's it. That's the easiest way we can add jQuery to our HTML page. All right. So adding jQuery to the HTML page, we already looked at. Either you can download the jQuery file to your local system and add it to the HTML page by using the script tag with the URL on where it is stored, or you can add it using the CDN like we just saw in case of Google. Okay, moving on. So modifying web pages. The most common use of jQuery is to use it to modify a web page, and that is true for most of the extensions which are libraries that provide extended functionality over JavaScript. So for example, if you want to change the color of an element on an event or show an element on an event, for example, let's consider you want to display an error message pop-up box to the user when they enter wrong credit card details. Such functionalities can be handled by jQuery. However, before we jump in these use cases, we must refresh our memory about DOM, that is the document object model. So DOM provides a object representation of HTML page, which means all of the elements or events, etc., can be represented as objects, which can be accessed using JavaScript, or in our case, it will be jQuery. So selecting the page elements using the jQuery. So do you remember how we selected DOM elements using the good old JavaScript? we use something called document.getElementById or getElementBy class name. jQuery provides a much more easier way to access the elements and attach event handlers to them. So let's quickly go to JS Fiddle right here. Let me close this. Let me clear this out. And in here, let me add jQuery. I'll add the latest version. Let me add a boilerplate code. All right, excellent. So now let's create an element here with some ID. So I'll create a div with an ID of, let's say, my div. And if I were to access this in my log, the console.log, what I will do is I will say console.log. Let me add some space. I'll make sure I remove the space later on. I'll start with the dollar symbol. This is a global jQuery function. What this means is we initiated the jQuery, and inside this we will add a pound symbol and say my div. So the pound symbol allows us to access the ID attribute of any given element. So in this case, we're accessing my div, right? So I'll just say this, and I will add a square bracket with 0 because I want to access the first thing that that is provided to me in the log. So I'll just say this, and if you can see, I can access the element right here. Okay, so this is equivalent to the expression we had in JavaScript called document.getElementById. Okay, so moving on. Oh, my mistake. So we can add content to the page in real time. For that, we use the append function on the element which we have to access. So let's edit our existing code to see how this works. Let me go back. So let me attach a new element to this existing div. So what I'll do is I will quickly comment this out and append a, let's say, header tag element to this div. So I will first access the div using my div. I'll use the append function, and inside of here I will say h1. I'll say hi there, and I'll close the h1 tag. Okay, if I save this, you can see the h1 tag added inside my div. Perfect. Moving on to the next slide. We can set attributes of tags which we have selected by using the attribute function. So let's look at the attributes of tags which we have already in our code. So let's add an attribute in our HTML file for our div, my div, and for that we'll say name. Let's say my let's say content div, main content div. Okay, now let's see if we can get this attribute by using the attribute function. Okay, so what I will do is I will just say I'll just reuse this console.log, and instead of the 0 I will just add I will just add the attribute function. Alright, save this. Alright, I get a script error. I don't know why I get the script error. Let me see. Oh, I have to pass in the name. I'm sorry. So we have to pass in the name and save it, and we get this attribute right here. Alright, excellent. However, one thing to keep in mind, the attribute method gets the attribute value for the first element. So this is the first element in the math set. To get the value of each element individually, we'll have to use looping methods such as each or map, which we'll cover in the future sessions of this course. Now for setting the attributes, we can use the same attribute function, with name and value passed in as parameters to this. So in this case, let's say if I want to add an attribute of class. So how would we do that? So I would say dollar get the element first, and my div attribute, and I will add the class and the value for it. So I'll say my class. Save this. All right, so it's saved, but we didn't see anything. So let's just quickly see if it was applied. And inside of here, I'll say class. Save this, and I get the value of the class attribute that we have set for this particular div. Perfect. Now, if you want to add more than one attribute at any given time, then we have to group them together in an object, right? So for example, let's quickly see how this will look. Let me make some space here. All right. So what I'll do is I'll just convert this into an object. So we'll have to use a key value pair. So remove these double quotes from the key. And let me add another attribute. I'll say title. I'll add my title as the value. Remove this extra space. Save this and see if this worked or not. So let me just log the title attribute. Save this. Yes, I get my title right here, and of course the class as well. So perfect. So this was applied. Perfect. So moving on to the next slide. So we already covered the attribute method. Moving on to reading, setting, and removing the HTML attributes. Yeah. So let's look at some other ways we can find attributes, values for elements, and also how to remove any of these. So let's look at getting the content first. So we use the text, HTML, and value methods. Let's look at the HTML method first. What this does is to get the HTML contents of the first element in the set of matched elements, or even to set HTML contents for every matched element. Right. So let's log the contents out for our div. So do you know what the contents are for our div? You can see it here. There's nothing in here, but remember we added a h1 tag right here. So if we, let me just quickly comment this out and make some space and quickly log out that. I'll just reuse this code. And instead of attribute, we just need the HTML and remove the value that has been passed in. So it should log in the h1 tag that we have been setting it in here. So if I save this, there we go. So we get the h1 element that has been present inside the div. So this is the raw HTML, right? So we have the opening and closing braces as well. Perfect. Now let's look at the text. It allows us to get or set the combined text contents for each element in the set of matched elements. So let's look at an example. Let me create a paragraph tag inside here real quick. So I will add a paragraph tag and we'll give it an ID of my paragraph, and inside let's say something like hello world. All right, perfect. Now if I were to see the text content inside this paragraph element, all I would do is, let me just quickly reuse this, same time, and in here I will just call in the ID of my paragraph, so it's paragraph, and I will call in the text method to get the text inside of the text content inside of it. So let me save this and I get hello world. So perfect. Now let's look at the value method. So the value method is primarily used to get values from form elements. such as input, select, or text area. So let's quickly create a input element in here of type button. Let's say type button. I'll give it a value of, say, click me, and I'll give it an ID of my button. All right, perfect. Now let's see if we can get a value of this. We already have a value set here for click me. I'll just reuse this again. Oops. And instead of my paragraph, I'll say my button, and I'll get a value of this button. So I'll say val. If I save this, I get click me, right? So perfect. So this is particularly important during the form submission. So like, for example, if the user has entered email and password, and if you want to get the value that has been entered into the form, and you can just get these values and then you can process it. Okay, so moving on. So the element selector can also be used to select multiple elements. Let's select paragraph and h1 elements that we already have in our code and change the background color to see how this works actually. So let me go back and me actually remove some of these. It's taking too much space. Oops, my mistake. All right, so let me access the h1 as well as the paragraph. So I'll say h1 of p, and now I have to change the background for h1 and the paragraph. So I'll use something called a CSS method, which will allow me to change the properties of the CSS for these particular elements. So I want to change the background color, and I want to change it to let's say blue. Okay, let me save this, and as you can see, it changed the background color to blue for the header as well as the paragraph. Perfect. Great. So now before we end this session, let's quickly recap what we learned today. So in this session, we covered what JavaScript libraries are and how you can use them. We understood what jQuery is and how we can add jQuery to our HTML page. But most importantly, how we can manipulate the DOM using jQuery. We're just getting started, and we'll cover jQuery in quite some detail from next session onwards. So I'll see you in the next session. Take care. Bye-bye.